You're listening to JetNation Radio, the official podcast of JetNation.com, the largest independent fan site in the NFL. Be sure to check out our forums and talk all things Jets with thousands of other diehard Jets fans. Now, to get you up to date on all the latest Jets news, notes, and quotes, here are your hosts, Glenn Naughton, Dylan Tereman, and Alex Varallo.
Good evening, Jets fans. I am Glenn Naughton. This is JetNation Radio. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. Much appreciated from us. At the moment, it's myself and Dylan. Alex is questionable. We had a message from him a little while ago. He's not feeling so great, so he's gonna try to call in a little bit if he can. If not, me and Dylan will hold it down. We've got Dennis Waszak of the Associated Press calling in tonight. Good friend of the show. We've had him on several times. And he's going to call in tonight and talk a little bit of draft. Are you there, Dylan? And it would appear Dylan is not there, although he just messaged me, said he's here, he's muted, but he's not. Dylan, if you're there, I've got you here in the studio. You are showing up. You are showing up as a live mic. So let's hope this isn't one of those shows that has to get scrapped. Are you there, Dylan? That's not ideal. So let's see here. Dylan, can you hear me? All right. Well, Dylan's going to try to call back in and see if we can get this thing rolling. If not, we'll come up with an alternative plan. But as of right now, as I said, myself, Dylan, Dennis Waszak's going to call in a little bit later to talk draft. And what are we down to, folks? 8 days, 9 days, single digits. The draft is we're finally down to single digits on the countdown. Because I don't know about you guys, and I say it all the time. Just every year, it seems like the time it takes to get from the final day of the season to the draft seems to get a month longer every single year. And let's try again. Dylan, are you there?
I am here.
All right. There we go, Dylan.
Awesome.
Not sure what happened there, but I connected about 30 seconds late, and you were showing right away, but weren't coming through. But anyway, you're here now. We're going to cover some draft stuff today. Thank goodness we're down to single-digit days until the draft is here.
Oh, yeah.
It really seems, not only does it seem like it gets longer every year, but years like this when you don't have a quarterback and it's just, you actually sent out a tweet the other day, Dylan, and it reminded me because I normally make this point every year as a public service announcement, and I wanted to touch on that as well. And for those of you listening, some of you may need to hear this, but it drives me nuts every year. And I'm sure I say this every year. There's more than one round in the draft.
Yep,
because
that's the one.
Every year, I see these fans. What do you mean, take a offensive lineman? We don't have any receivers. What do you mean, take this? We don't have that. Like, yeah, there's 7 rounds. And some years you have even more picks than that, as is the case with the Jets this year. 10 picks, all right? So this crazy, we can't draft this because we need that. And especially in a year like this when you've got multiple, five picks in the top 90 or 80 or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. The picks are there. The potential is there. And Joe Douglas, as far as I'm concerned, as much fun as it is to talk draft, and the mocks are fun, and I'm doing them on TDN consistently to pass the time. I get it, but I don't think I've ever been more convinced that a GM is going to trade down. I really from 23. I think 23 or 34. I think you can take it to the bank that Joe Douglas is going to trade down with one of those picks. I think Joe Douglas, and I said this months ago, I think he wants to come away from this class with 14, 15 picks. because listen, the Jets, they have that many holes that they could use 15. They're sitting on 10, and they've got 2 extras, or the 1 extra first and 34. Those picks have value, and I think he'll look to move down, same way he did last year when he moved down and still ended up getting Denzel Mims. I think Joe Douglas will look to move down. I think he'll make 14 or 15 picks, and and even if it's let's say it's a dozen. Let's say he picks up a couple extra picks and he makes 12 picks. This is a question I meant to pitch to you, Alex, or I meant to pitch to you, Dylan, and Alex, but Alex obviously not here right now. Because I was surprised. I pitched this on the forums at JetNation, which if you're not on, check them out. Go to JetNation.com, join in or log in, join the forums, and join the discussions. And there's some heated, lively, fun, funny, any number of ways you wish to describe it, debates on our forums. But I posted this question in there a few weeks ago, and a surprising number of people were like, that's ridiculous. You're an idiot. I mean, they always call me an idiot, but, you're an idiot. There's no way I would do that. What are you thinking? And it really blew me away, because the way I look at the Jets quarterback situation right now, and maybe it's just because I'm not a big Morgan fan, I view it as they have no quarterbacks. They don't have a veteran leader.
Yep.
They don't have a proven backup. They have nothing. I actually like Mike White more than I like Morgan. But in all honesty, that's probably because I was a big Mike White guy when he was coming out of Western Kentucky. But I'm looking at this quarterback situation and thinking, whether it's Wilson or Fields or whoever at 2, if I'm Joe Douglas and I'm sitting on 12 picks and it comes to round 5, 6, 7, I'm probably going to grab another quarterback. And that, as a day 3 pick that isn't, not burning a resource. And, I'm not saying take a guy in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, but take a guy in the 1st and then take another guy later. A guy who jumps out to me who I think would be good for, an offense like this if it looks the way we're expecting it to. I like Shane Buechele out of SMU. And I just think that this is a guy who can be that developmental, because why shouldn't the Jets take another quarterback without a proven guy on the roster, without a proven backup on the roster? As I've said before, in years past, but of course we thought Darnold was going to be the guy. But it was like, take a guy every year till you have one, and use a day 3 pick on a guy to develop somebody. So I would be in favor of that, but I would just like your thoughts on that, Dylan. I couldn't believe how many people. I guess a lot more people than I realized are sold on James Morgan, which came as a surprise to me. But I pitched that question on the forums, and overwhelmingly, people were like, "No, you don't get a second quarterback." And I'm thinking, all right, if you got 13 picks, I would take 2 quarterbacks. But to each his own. But Dylan, would you consider another quarterback on day 3 if you're Joe Douglas and you make some deals and you have 12, 13 picks?
I think it's definitely worth a consideration, especially once you get into the day 3 value of the quarterback. I like Shane Buechele a little bit too. I haven't done too much work after like the top 6 or 7 quarterbacks, just because we don't think that the Jets will be in the market for any of those guys. But I absolutely think it's worth it. I mean, you look at a team like Buffalo. I know it wasn't the exact same draft class, but they just drafted Jake Fromm in the 5th round as just a developmental backup guy to Josh Allen. So if you can strike gold later on in the 3rd round and get another quarterback like a Buechele, there's, why not? I don't see why not. I think maybe a veteran option could be the better play so that your quarterback room isn't entirely young from starter down. But, I mean, we saw names like Alex Smith, Brian Hoyer floated around. Obviously, Alex Smith retired. Brian Hoyer came in on a visit or was expecting a visit. Maybe the veteran option would be better than the rookie, but I think you should probably take a running back and a quarterback on day 3 of every draft, if not every other draft. So I can't blame Joe Douglas if that's his process. I'm not sold on James Morgan. I was rated really low on my board last year. Didn't do a ton of work on him, but then, you see the flashes, the big arm. I'm not entirely sold that he could be the guy something were to happen to the starter. So definitely needs to be an option later on in the draft for sure.
Yeah, I think the example that I always like, even if you want to make the case that he's been a bust to some degree, was when I remember the oohs and ahs when the Redskins took RG3 and Kirk Cousins in the same draft. And as it turned out, RG3 started out like a house on fire. But then, of course, the injury, and he was never the same. And then Kirk Cousins went on to become their starter. Of course, they let him walk, but it still showed that there was some value. It wasn't a bad idea to bring another guy in, if it was a little bit later in the draft. And like I said, we'll be joined later by Dennis Waszak of the AP, Jets beat writer, all around great guy. Dennis is a really good dude. I've had the opportunity to speak with him on many occasions at training camp, and just a good guy. Has some good insight, and he's going to go over a few questions that me and Dylan will throw at him in regards to the draft. What do they do with 23, and what are some of the drafts? What are some of the moves we might see from the Jets after the draft? So we'll discuss that later. But we're going to get into at the moment, Dylan. Let's go ahead and do, with the draft being as close as it is, some of our best and worst memories of the draft as Jets fans. We know there have been lots of ups and downs, and with sort of tied into that, it's kind of the same topic, with a slight twist on it. Is just off the top of your head, just going back, who are some of the players, and it doesn't even have to be Jets, although that's where the focus will be, but guys that you were the most right and the most wrong about, like guys that you were like, this dude's going to be not worthy of an NFL roster spot, and he turns out to be a great player, or you thought a guy was a surefire lock to meet his full potential and just didn't get it done. And again, some of the memories you've had, Dylan, over the years of sitting down watching Jets drafts. What's your normal routine, and what are some of the either the very excited or the super super unhappy responses to some of the picks the Jets have made over the years?
Yeah, so I'll start off with like one of my old traditions watching the draft. When I first moved to my new house in middle school, I met a couple buddies that have been lifelong friends ever since, and they were the ones that really introduced me into the draft, probably around 2005, 2006. And we used to always go up in my buddy's tree house and plug in this little tiny television, and every time one of our teams would pick, we'd run up in the tree house and we'd go sit there and watch the picks. And the first year we did that was 2006. And to the Jets, that's one of the best draft classes we've had in a while. You have DeBrickashaw and Nick Mangold coming out of the first round. And as a young kid, I just remember like, oh my gosh, we took 2 offensive linemen. Like, how boring is this? We're over here having catch in the backyard. So we're thinking about quarterbacks and receivers. And I'm young at the time, so O-line was not the sexy pick for me, but it turned out to be one of the best drafts that the Jets have ever had. And we continued that treehouse tradition for a little bit until we all got too big to fit in the treehouse. And now it's kind of just like a cheesesteak and wing tradition now. We just all go sit around, drink some beers, have fun. So that's kind of our new process.
That's awesome, though. And that's one of the great things about sports is the those friendships, that we make with our buddies when we're kids, and carry them through. It's a little different for me, as I've said before, living in the UK now and being, having spent some time away from the US through the military and all that. But I still have, same 2 buddies that I've been watching the Jets with since I was 11 years old, and I'm 45 now, so we're talking 34 years. And whenever there's a big move, same 2 buddies that I'll message on Messenger, and we'll just go back and forth. We had some pretty intense arguments this offseason about what to do with Darnold. They both wanted to keep him. I said they got to trade him. But yeah, stuff like that, man, and just little traditions like that. And I think they would acknowledge that I'm much more of a draft maniac than they are. They pay close attention, but they don't obsess over it quite as bad as I do. But I remember that draft, of course, the Brick and Mangold draft. I remember that one well because I was that's when internet cafes were fairly new, and I had taken a World War II trip. I'm a huge World War II nerd, and this is back. I was stationed in Florida, but I had booked a trip to take a World War II trip to go from London across parts of Europe, France and Luxembourg and Patton's Grave and all that, ending up in Berlin. And I was, frantically trying to find an internet cafe to log on and see who the Jets were taking. And I basically watched the first, all of it really, online when internet access wasn't as widely available. And that was a great class. I see what you mean, though. I can remember my young, in your very early years as a fan, it's just all about the offensive playmakers. You just want the guys who handle the ball and run really fast. Offensive linemen are boring. But then as you grow and you kind of learn the importance of different positions, you're kind of, you want the offensive lineman to get picked.
Now I'm banging the table for him almost at every draft.
Yeah, exactly. For me personally, some of the best and worst. Worst, I would probably have to say, because it's the first draft I can remember as a fan. I was 11. I was aware, you have that, obviously, when you start watching football at some point. Prior to that, you're not really a fan. I was aware of guys like Mark Gastineau, Wesley Walker, Ken O'Brien, Freeman McNeil, just, living in the Bronx. And some of the stores would have, the posters for sale all the time out on the sidewalks. So I knew who these guys were. I knew I had uncles who were Jets fans, so I rooted for them. But the first, I had that first time where I read about the draft and kind of had some understanding of what it was. And that was the year the Jets took Blair Thomas, who went on to be one of the biggest busts in team history. I didn't understand guys could be busts. I'd never watched a draft before. I thought, okay, if you're picking the best guys, then they're going to go on to be the best guys.
Right, exactly.
Obviously had some learning to do. So that was a disaster. And again, back then it was all about, especially again for me as a kid, it was I just wanted to know who the first guy was, 'cause that's going to be the best guy. But years after that, in the years that followed, I remember the 93 draft really well. I was a big Marvin Jones guy, and I really wanted him. Jets ended up coming away with him, which was really nice. And Adrian Morrell, I was a big fan of his because he made a really, at the time I thought it was cool and gutsy, but years later, again now I know it was just dumb. I believe it was Morrell who scooped up I went to the Jets-Giants preseason game that year, and the Jets fielded a punt where the ball was sort of bouncing between a bunch of Giants defenders, and Adrian Morrell ran through the middle of them and scooped it up and had a big return. I didn't realize those are the kind of things you get if you do that during the regular season. I was young enough that I was like, that's awesome. Thought it was the coolest thing ever. Then of course the Keyshawn draft, first time in my life they had the number 1 overall pick. They go with a wide receiver. Yet another first rounder who got traded. That's just kind of the way the Jets do business. And really, one of the worst ones, in '98, and it really turned out. That to me is one of the worst classes in team history. That was a Bill Parcells production, and Parcells had a couple of atrocious drafts with the Jets, Hall of Fame credentials as a coach and all. But I'll run you through that class in a second. But I remember I was sold on the fact that the Jets were getting Orlando Pace that year. I was 100% like, this is the guy, they're getting him. Of course, Parcells trades that pick, moves down a few spots, and then trades down again, I believe with Tampa Bay, was it? Ends up passing in both the spots the Jets traded down from. Hall of Fame left tackle was drafted. No, it was Seattle, because it was Orlando Pace at 1 was a Hall of Famer. They traded down and then traded down with Seattle, and Seattle took Walter Jones, who's a Hall of Famer. And the Jets ended up taking Dorian Boose, a defensive end who had 1 career sack in 44 games. So a complete bust. And here's the rest of that class. I mean, Jesus, what a disaster. It was Dorian Boose and Scott Frost, the Nebraska quarterback who Parcells was going to move to safety. He played 59 career games. And actually, I take that back. I said Booz had a sack. I'm looking at the numbers now. That was Scott Frost. So Booz never had a sack. At least according to Pro Football Reference. So Scott Frost went second. Kevin Williams was a DB who had one career interception, which, if I'm not mistaken, came in his first pro game against the 49ers. Jason Fabini, best pick of that class, played 152 career games. Casey Daly never really played. I think he had some injury issues. Doug Karczewski never played a game. Blake Spence had a blocked field goal in a playoff game one time. That about sums up his career. One career touchdown. Eric Bateman never played a game. Eric Abagu, he actually had a pick against the Bills at a Bills game I went to at the old Giant Stadium. And what did he play? 90 career games, but I think the majority of that was with the Dallas Cowboys. Chris Brazel. Are you familiar with Chris Brazel, Dylan?
No. I was 3 years old when this draft took place, so the only one that's rung a bell to me is Jason Fabini.
Yeah, he would be the only one. Brazel was an interesting story because he played 14 career games, was out of football, went off into obscurity, at least as far as we knew, for years. And then he popped up in a news story. He left football and went on to become an Army sniper, which was pretty awesome.
Oh, wow.
Then there was Dustin Johnson, fullback, and Lawrence Hart, tight end. Neither guy. Oh, no, sorry. They each played one career game. So, yeah, that was a lot of draft picks, and only one of them became a starter. It was Jason Fabini.
Wow.
And you passed on 2 Hall of Fame left tackles. So that's yeah, that's kind of a disaster. And I also recall, for those of you who remember the old Mike and the Mad Dog days on WFAN, it was actually kind of funny because both guys ended up being not very good. But there was I was listening to that draft live on WFAN, and the Jets took Kyle Brady over J.J. Stokes because J.J. Stokes was the guy everyone predicted the Jets would take, a receiver. I want to say it was UCLA, but I'm not 100% sure.
As well?
I'm sorry?
Wasn't Warren Sapp in that draft class as well with Kyle Brady?
Yeah, that was the draft where all the fans were chanting, we want Sapp, we want Sapp. The Jets went with Brady instead, and Mike and the Mad Dog, I think it was Mad Dog. I get that it was his shtick, but I think it might have been Francesa, actually. One of them was going nuts that the Jets didn't draft J.J. Stokes because J.J. Stokes was supposed to be the next big thing. And the funny story there was that once the Jets passed on J.J. Stokes, the Cleveland Browns had the next pick, and they traded down with the San Francisco 49ers, who then took J.J. Stokes. And, of course, the Niners had just won a Super Bowl, or, they were still a sort of a top team. So they were ripping the Jets. Oh, this guy, he's not good enough for the Jets. And the best team in the league just traded up to get him, blah, 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 blah. The funny story to that one, Dylan, again, probably a few years before you watched it up close, the Cleveland Browns, the reason they ended up trading down, rumor had it, they were so all in on Kyle Brady and they were so sure he was going to fall to them that they didn't have anyone else they were considering. They had even contacted Penn State to get Brady's shoe size and had shoes made up, for him. And they were 100% sure he was their guy. I think it was like the 11th, whatever pick it was. They were so sure he was their guy, they didn't consider another player. And when the Jets took Brady, they panicked and they were unprepared and they took the first trade offer that came their way. It came from the 49ers.
Jeez.
They drafted J.J. Stokes, who was also very bad at playing football in the NFL. And lots of those memories, lots of bad stuff. The best though was probably the 2000 draft with 4 first-rounders. That was an epic thing. I don't know that we'll ever see that again. A team with 4-1.
Right.
And you hit on 4 of them. Becht wasn't great. Pennington had the injury issues. But Ellis and Abraham were fantastic players. Abraham, of course, becomes Nick Mangold when they trade him to the Falcons for their first rounder and draft Nick Mangold with it. More recently, Dylan, last year's draft, and I'm trying not to be too down on it, But the Ashton Davis pick really made me mad. Until I've said this has happened to me a few years now, where I am so 100% convinced there is a specific position the Jets are not going to address that I do close to no homework on it. And it's happened a couple times now where they take a guy. Like it happened with Leo. Leonard Williams, to me, defensive line was the last thing in the world the Jets were taking. I don't think I watched more than 5 minutes of film on defensive linemen that year, and they took that guy number one. I couldn't believe it. I was floored. And then the same thing happened last year with Ashton Davis. I felt like you have Jamal, you have Marcus May. Even if you are taking a safety, you're not taking one before the 5th round. So I looked at a couple late round guys, and I was so pissed off when they made the Davis pick, and I knew nothing about him because I'd watched literally I may have seen a couple minutes of him, if that. But then I start seeing all these people talk about what a great athlete he is, and he could be a corner. And then I was like, oh, okay, well now I'll ease up a little. If the Jets view him as a corner and that's where he's going to play, maybe they got a little steal here. There's clearly no intention of playing him at corner. Those were people who liked him, and they were pumping him up a little bit. Dumb pick as far as I'm concerned. Still have hope he might be a good player. But, again, for positional value, another safety in the top 70 is, kind of I've had enough of that. The P-Ryan
I think that whole four picks in a row right there. Sorry to cut you off. I was going to say those 4 picks right in the middle of last year's draft are very big head-scratchers with Davis, Zuniga, P-Ryan, Morgan, like, each one back-to-back when the pick came in, it's like, who is this guy? I don't know much about him. Why are we taking him such a high pick? Zuniga was 79th, and I thought that was a pretty big reach. And then, obviously, James Morgan, top 125, is just silly looking back on it. So that whole middle section of the draft, it's just real head-scratchers.
Yeah, I said it at the time. What really made it tough is that I don't think I'm alone in saying I was ecstatic when they started off with Becton and Mims. I thought, oh, my God. They've got a franchise tackle and a number 1 receiver to start things off. They're going to clean house this time. And I thought they're going to grab at least one more receiver in such a deep class. I thought they're going to grab at least one more offensive lineman. They did later. They took Cam Clark, who I was a big fan of going into the draft. P-Ryan, didn't care for him at all. Zuniga, he missed so much time due to injury. I didn't watch much of him at all. James Morgan, I actually when we did our mocks last year, the only reason I didn't mock him to the Jets, and I was going to mock him in the 5th, and it was it wasn't even because I liked him. It was because the reason that I think may be the reason why the Jets took him is I saw the Jets had met with him a couple times, and I saw the Patriots had met with him a couple times. And I was like, oh, are the Jets going to try to play keep away with this guy? But I think that might be why.
Which is funny because I think one of those picks is from, wasn't one of those 4th-round picks that one of the ones that New England traded up to select the tight end in the 3rd round? Because they gave us 2 4ths from last year's draft to move up to select the tight end. So that's funny that we turned around and used one of those picks to potentially block a quarterback from going to New England.
It might be one of those guys, or one of those picks. But Morgan is a guy, like I'm just not sold on. Big arm, but he's one of those guys. At least when you look at him in college, he made a lot of big time throws in terms of just sheer distance. But a lot of them were those underthrown deep throws where it's a 50-yard completion, but if he had a little more on it, it's a 65, 75-yard completion where his receivers are having to slow down mid-route to let the ball come down to them. That doesn't go over so well on the pros. Listen, I understand it happens with every quarterback from time to time. I just felt like it happened a lot with Morgan. So I actually was going – the reason I didn't mock him to the Jets last year, I forget which draft engine we used, but he wasn't on there. I wanted to pick him in the 6th.
Okay.
Not wanted to. I was trying to do what I thought the Jets might do. But anyway – love the Cam Clark pick, still do. Bryce Hall, you kind of felt better about things. I did anyway when they went with Clark and Hall. Clark, of course, coming off injury, you felt like he was a top 2 or 3 round prospect who you ended up getting in the 5th. And then, of course, Braden Mann. So mixed bag last year. Loved the first couple picks. Didn't really care much for the next 4 picks. And then I liked the following, the three that followed that up. I didn't like trading, even though it was a seventh. I didn't like giving up a pick for Quincy Wilson. I felt like if a corner who's that young was any good, like, you're not getting him for a seventh. And as it turns out, he wasn't very good. Ended up getting cut.
That seventh round pick, I was probably on Twitter, but in my head for sure, I was saying, hey, let's go get Lamar Jackson. Then he ends up being a UDFA to the Jets anyway. So it all came full circle on that one.
Yeah, my thought was, because, again, it really shocked me that there wasn't another receiver taken. But we're going to go to the phones right now because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Dennis, is this you? You with us?
I'm with you guys. How you guys doing?
Doing great, Dennis. This is Dennis Waszak of the AP Associated Press, New York Jets beat writer, who, as I said, does come on the show from time to time. Always a pleasure having him. Dennis, how have you been?
I've been good. It's been one of those off seasons. Not too busy, right? I mean, just one of those things where just speculation, rumors, and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, it's been interesting. Let's get to the draft, right, guys? Like let's get there and let's move on because these past few months have been pretty frustrating and just like, again, let's get to the draft and get going here.
Yeah, it has been a pretty crazy time. I mean, whether it's football related, non-football related, but I said at the top that every year it feels like the time from the Super Bowl to the draft gets a month longer than the year before. I make a conscious effort to not talk about it on the show for the first month plus after the season because I know there's going to be so much of it. And even still, by the end of it, I'm like, enough. I've had it. How many different ways, how many different angles, how many different players can you look at? But anyway, Dylan's going to kick us off here, Dennis. We're gonna pepper you with a few questions about the draft, about the post-draft process and things like that. So you can go ahead and kick it off, Dylan. All
right, sounds good. Thanks again for joining us, Dennis. But with dust settling on the second overall pick, with the overwhelming consensus being Zach Wilson out of BYU, the fans have started to turn their focus towards that second pick in the first round, number 23 overall. So a bit of a two-parter, but is there any position groups or players that you specifically would like the Jets to target there? And have you also heard any clues or rumblings as to who they could be eyeing with that pick?
I would say you have so many holes, right, on this roster going into the draft that they really need as much as they can. But specifically, I'd say cornerback, offensive line, some playmakers, wide receiver, running back, and outside linebacker, somebody who can get to the quarterback. But I do think at number 23, you have options if you're Joe Douglas. You have a potential to trade up or trade back, get more picks, that kind of thing. But if he sticks at 23, there could be some really intriguing players there who could spin and make impacts in their first year. And I think if you're looking at cornerback and you have guys like Asante Samuel Jr. and Greg Newsome from Northwestern, Tyson Campbell from Georgia, excuse me, and if you have a guy like Caleb Farley from Virginia Tech, that's a guy who might be there at 23 and you have to pounce on him, So I think there will be some pretty good cornerbacks at that number 23 spot. And at offensive line, now I think a lot of what the Jets do in the draft, especially in the early rounds, will help determine the fates of Alex Lewis and Greg Van Roten in particular, because if they can get upgrades through the draft, I think you might see some of those guys, potentially cut. But you look at some of these players like Wyatt Davis from Ohio State, Ben Cleveland from Georgia, Elijah Vera Tucker, who probably wouldn't be there at 23, but, maybe Joe Douglas likes him and wants to move up. So I think you have those options there. And that's what makes this intriguing, right, guys? You have all of these holes, so to speak, on the roster and at certain spots that, you don't really need to pigeonhole. It's like you really can. You know, we hear it all the time, the best player available, all of that. But whatever you have on your board at that point, if you're Joe Douglas, whether it's an offensive lineman, cornerback, an edge rusher, you can really feel good about taking that guy. I mean, if the guy from Notre Dame, Owusu Karamoah, if he's there, that might be a guy that you add to that defense. So my thought would be that they will take a corner with that number 23 spot. And I think just based on what you've heard, especially if you have, if you have that quarterback with the number 2 pick, and then one of your big holes on the defense is in the secondary, a corner. If you add a guy who can come in and start right away, well, man, after what you did in free agency up front and added to that defensive line, all of a sudden you've got a really, potentially solid, really solid defense. Now, the question, like we've always had with the Jets over the last few years, has been the offense, and they need weapons. So you wonder if Devontae Smith or like Jalen Waddle fall to that far down, and that would be a guy that they would add to that receiving core. But long story short, I think they go corner at number 23 if they stay there.
And you mentioned Alex Lewis and Greg Van Roten as potential replacements via the draft, so that'll lead me into the next question. Are there any other moves that you could see the Jets making in that additional wave of free agency post-draft that could be potential cap casualties along with a Lewis or a Greg Van Roten?
I think those are the main guys. I think some people have mentioned George Fant, and I think part of his contract is already guaranteed. That's kicked in. So I don't think that he would be a potential casualty after the draft because of that. Plus, he's got some versatility to him, and he could be a backup. I think they like him. I think they like his athleticism. I think he could be upgraded, through the draft. But if not, I think they're okay. Conor Mc Mcdermott, one of those guys. It's interesting because that offensive line, when you look at as a unit, it's like, well, they weren't that good. And then you look at them individually and you're like, well, he's not too bad, and this guy's not too bad. And Alex Lewis wasn't bad when he was, when he was playing, and he was. It's that's the type of thing though. Moving forward, they need to have that locked down. It's not like he's pretty good. He's okay. Everybody's got to be Mekhi Becton and up. Like that's if you're bringing in with the number 2 pick a quarterback who you're going to build around. That's the key. You need to have an offensive line that can build with the quarterback and move forward with the quarterback and with Mike LaFleur's offense and all of that. So I could see potentially the Jets trying to move on from some of the veteran offensive linemen if they upgrade through the draft. But as for other positions, I think they've really got some of those spots set. I think Henry Anderson was number 1. Like you didn't think he was going to be back, and that played out like that. Maybe Ryan Griffin, a tight end, he might be a guy that, depending on what goes on in the draft, and they just brought back Daniel Brown and they signed Tyler Kroft in the offseason. So maybe there's not a spot for Ryan Griffin in his contract, so he's a potential cut. So I would say that's there probably won't be too many more of those, but I think Griffin is definitely one that you could look out for.
Yeah, I think that's a good point on Ryan Griffin, Dennis. He's a guy who is – it's really tough, I think, when a team is as bad as the Jets were last year. It's hard to evaluate anyone fairly because the whole thing was just a disaster.
Yeah.
But Griffin really – I mean, specifically him, just different guy, invisible. He's one of those guys that, you look at the fact that he had, 8 or 12 catches, and even that seems like a lot. Like, I can't remember one. I can't remember one catch from him last year. He really was invisible. And not a ton of money, but still, to pay a couple million for a guy who did so little, you could see them moving on from him. But we've talked about the fact that Wilson is likely the pick at 2. He's the guy that he's the Vegas odds-on favorite. You're now starting to see him to the Jets in almost every mock, whereas before there's a little more variety with the other quarterbacks. And there's a lot. We see it every year. These quarterbacks they're under the microscope. They're getting picked apart. One day they're great. The next day there's question marks. We've seen people question Zach Wilson's commitment. He's a spoiled brat. He wasn't a team captain. He's not a guy you want leading your team. Then Justin Fields, we hear, Orlovsky says he's hearing that he's, last guy in, first guy out, questionable work ethic. And if you've been following long enough, we know that sometimes stories come out from teams that want the guy. Like maybe somebody wants Fields at 8 and they don't think he's going to fall. So they're like, hey, Jaworski, or hey, whoever, hey, Orlovsky, we don't like this kid because of XYZ. You can share that quote. Now, I don't know how many teams are rearranging their draft boards based on rumors being shared by ESPN analysts, but Fields has gotten through the ringer a little bit, Wilson a little bit. We saw a little bit of it for Trevor Lawrence this past week because his dad said he's not, he's not a super competitive guy, which I think is something probably taken out of context. I don't think you get to the point Trevor Lawrence has gotten to if you're not a super competitive guy. But all in all, the top guys, the guys I mentioned, Mac Jones, Trey Lance, how would you rank these guys? Because everyone's ranking seems to be sort of, you can have 10 people and 11 ranked 10 different ways.
One of the things that I could say, and it's funny, what you were saying there is so true, because it's amazing how many narratives and rumors are thrown out time of year, and you hear certain things and people jump on them. People, if you say, this guy, Zach Wilson, is this, it could be, a well-followed Twitter personality, or it could be somebody with very few Twitter followers, and people will jump on it and people eat it up. And that's the age, we're in with social media, and people are just starving for information. And the funny thing is, I think if all of the research and digging and investigating that's done on players who are, going into the draft, if we did that with regular society, there would be no crime anywhere. You know what I mean? It's just unbelievable. Like the combing that people do
the
through
analysis,
backgrounds. Yes, yeah, totally. And so I really do take a lot of that with a grain of salt. I think when you hear rumblings, it makes you kind of pause. But I'll tell you this: every single team has people who are going through the backgrounds, and they're doing interviews, and they're finding out what the real story is on people. And I would say this about all of these guys, all of the stuff that's been said, Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields, just like you mentioned, Zach Wilson, they all are competitive, like you said, to get to this point. And if there are people taking shots at them now, that's only going to drive them. And Trevor Lawrence knows he's the number one pick. He's going to a franchise that needs a savior, so to speak, and he's going to be driven to do that. I have zero doubts that guy will be motivated to be the best, to be number one. He knows what's at stake here, and I don't buy any of that stuff about his not being competitive enough and all that. But to your question, I think if I had to rank them, I would probably say, based on the whole package, I would go definitely Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Justin Fields, then I'd go Trey Lance, and then Mac Jones. I think all five of those guys, they're going to be starters in this league, and it's such a crapshoot though, because that it's rare that you have five guys like this and they all become long-term starters and successful starters, So you just hope, if you're one of those teams drafting, that you got the right guy. And Trevor Lawrence is a sure thing. And then I think Zach Wilson and Justin Fields are in that next level of being guys who are going to do well in this league. And I think because of their skill sets. Then you go to the next, Trey Lance, he could be tremendous, or he might not be that great. And I'm not buying Mac Jones as a top 10 pick. I know his numbers and where he played at Alabama. They're tremendous, but I don't know. I can't see the 49ers going that far up in the draft and taking Mac Jones, but who knows? I mean, and a great point you made about, teams putting things out there about certain players, and maybe they even want that guy to kind of turn off all the other teams so that they back off. We don't know, and the fact that, going in, we know who the number one guy is, and we're pretty sure number two, but we thought number one, like a few years ago in the Darnold draft, that the Browns were going to take Darnold and the Jets were going to go either, Baker Mayfield or Josh Allen or Josh Rosen, at that point. So things happen, things change, things aren't always what they seem on social media or in the rumor mill. But I think it's safe to say Trevor Lawrence won, and I'd be stunned if the Jets don't take Zach Wilson. And I would think I can't see the Niners taking Mac Jones. I think Justin Fields is a good fit for them and what they plan to do and what they have been doing. Even though there's been some, change in the office, I see that happening. So that would be my ranking: Lawrence, Wilson, Fields, Lance, and Mac Jones.
Yeah, funny enough, having said everyone's got them different, that's how I'd rank them myself. Lance worries me because of the lack of pass attempts. I do think that's, to only play one full season of college football and to do it at North Dakota State. For as many people, who worry about Zach Wilson, he played a handful of big time schools, who maybe not have been at their best, but he still played at USC. He played at Tennessee and won both those games. He played Washington, lost that one. He beat UCF with a few key players opting out, so that one not as strong as it looks on paper. But even still, he had some of those big time programs on his schedule and played 3 seasons, 30 games, whereas Lance, has played a handful of games, has fewer than 300 attempts, and all of it, at that level. So, but at the same time, though, you see the arm strength, you see the electricity. He sort of, I know there are a lot of quarterbacks who can run now, but not a lot of guys who can run as well as he does. He's in that sort of Lamar Jackson, like Michael Vick echelon of just, explodes on that first step, and defenders are going to have a really hard time getting a hand on that guy. It's just a matter of when is he ready to start. We had this discussion earlier, Dylan, you, me, and Alex on a chat where, for a guy to throw 220 passes at North Dakota State, like, when is he ready to become an NFL starter? As a matter of fact, I listened to Albert Breer's podcast the other day. He had Trent Dilfer on, and they said, that guy needs to sit minimum 1 year. But that just doesn't happen nowadays with top 5, top 10 quarterbacks. So what do you do if you take a guy who really needs that time? But
right. And that's a good point too, because kind of like what I said with Lawrence and Fields and Wilson, I think those are the guys. If you're one of those top 3 or 4 teams, if you pick one of those guys, it's hard to second guess that. Even down the line in the future, if one of those guys doesn't work out, it's hard to knock that. Even the Jets taking Darnold, you can't knock that pick. That was the pick everybody would have made,
Absolutely.
And people thought the Browns were going to make that pick, and the Jets got that guy. That was the guy who everyone thought was going to be a star. It didn't work out, but you can't knock the Jets. So I think what you can knock a team for is not taking one of those guys and taking a risk and taking a Mac Jones or a Trey Lance in the top 5 and thinking that they're going to be a superstar. And if it doesn't work out, then, that sets your franchise back. So there are, there's levels, like I said, of sure things. But if you're picking 3rd and you take a Mac Jones, or you're 5th or whatever, and you take Trey Lance, man, you're taking a big leap of faith there. And if it works out, you look like a genius. And if not, in 3 years, you're right back here again.
And you mentioned a guy earlier, Dennis, when you were going through some of the possibilities at 23, and Caleb Farley, a guy who just a couple weeks ago was sort of universally viewed as a top 10 pick and the best corner in this class. Now he has a back surgery that, we're hearing is not supposed to hinder him, but how much of that, is because his agent is saying it. What else is his agent going to say? But if you're listen, I'm old enough that this will predate you, Dylan. I don't know if you'll remember this, Dennis. I remember different sport, but I remember listening to Scott Boras come on the radio and assure Yankee fans that Brian Taylor was going to be just fine after getting into a street fight, protecting his brother in his local neighborhood. The first high school kid to get $1 million bonus. He threw 1,000,000 miles an hour. He was never the same. So that didn't stick with me at all over the years. But at 23, you mentioned Farley. Do you think Joe Douglas, especially since this is an extra one, I mean, it still has value.
Yes.
You still want to hit. But do you think maybe he rolls the dice a little and says, Farley's got the injury concern, but I'm getting a top 10 corner at 23? Or, and I know this isn't as popular of a decision, I might like this guy more than most, but a guy like Walker Little out of Stanford, a guy who played left tackle at a level that some said he would be a top 10 pick. He opted out last year, busted his ACL up the year before that, so he only played a game or two. So you haven't seen him really in a couple years, but I view it as, well, now we know the ACL is going to be as recovered as it will ever be, and a year off at his age. We're not talking about a guy who's 29 and took 2 years off. You're talking about a guy who's still in his early 20s, is, to me, a day one starting left tackle if he went there. He's not going to with the Jets. But if he could play the right side and maybe be a guy that fills in if Becton gets dinged up, he missed a bunch of time last year. Do you think Joe Douglas says, this is a little bit of house money, I'm going to roll the dice on a guy who plays a premium position, corner or tackle, or even a Greg Rousseau out of Miami, another guy who opted out but was viewed as the top pass rusher coming into the season? I mean, the Jets Joe Douglas could legitimately be sitting at 23 and be able to choose from a left tackle who some projected as a top 10 guy, or a corner or edge guy who some viewed as the number one guys in their position in this class. Does he roll the dice and say a little bit of an injury risk here, in Rousseau it's more, again, sort of like the Lance thing, lack of reps. He doesn't have a ton of film, but because of the high ceiling and because of the fact it's a premium position, I'm going to roll the dice here.
Yeah, I could certainly see that, and especially just as you said, it's an extra, so to speak, number one pick, a first round pick. So they have some room to deal with, with a guy who's coming off an injury or is coming off of a layoff from playing, that kind of thing. Farley in particular is a guy who intrigues me, and if he's there, I would take him if I was the Jets, because he's a guy who could potentially start in week one if he's healthy enough. And I mean, they will know, or they will think they know how healthy he is, and it hasn't prevented the Jets in the past from taking players who have been injured going into the draft and that kind of thing, but it hasn't worked out that well. And think about it, they've taken guys later in the draft, Bryce Hall, Bless Austin. There have been some other guys over the years that they've taken a chance on, that guys that have been hurt. There was who's the defensive back a few years ago from Michigan, I think it was. His name escapes me.
The tall lanky
yes.
kid. I know.
Yes.
I know who you're talking about. It'll come to me in a minute.
So it's one of those deals where they took a chance late rounds, but here's a chance for them. All
Jeremy
three
Clark.
of those guys. Yes, Jeremy Clark. Thank you. So
yep.
I mean, it hasn't worked out great with all those guys. We'll see. Bryce Hall. Bless Austin was starting, and you might see both of those guys as potential starters, but I think they still want that upgrade. And I think Caleb Farley would be really just a tremendous addition to that secondary. And just the athleticism, and people say, he's just scratching the surface of his potential. And, if they're convinced that back is fine, it would be hard to pass up on him. Walker Little, I think, the Jets need offensive linemen who can play and who are healthy and they know aren't injury risks. And I think that might be a little bit of a red flag for Joe Douglas in the first round to take a guy like that. Knowing that if we're going to upgrade our offensive line and plug some guys in, a guy that has an injury history, that might not be the thing that they want to do, at that spot. A defensive guy who comes off the edge and Rousseau like that. Yeah, that I could see that happening too. So back to the original question, I definitely think Joe Douglas would take a chance on some of these guys at number 23. And even if Caleb Farley doesn't start right away because they have a couple of options to start off the season with, like I mentioned, Bless Austin and Bryce Hall, and they know that in their projections he will be a starter and he'll be a good starter. Well, it's hard to pass up that guy. So I think that's the opportunity that will present itself. And again, there are so many holes that they will have a bunch of players who will be at the top of their list that they'll have to make a judgment call on. So it's really intriguing. I mean, once they got rid of Sam Darnold and made it clear they were taking quarterback and Zach Wilson, okay, that took care of that mystery. Now that number 23 pick, it could go any way, and any of these guys that we've been talking about could go there. So, but if Farley's there, it would be hard for me as a GM to pass on him, just knowing the whole package of what he brings. And I mean, just the talent, and knowing that he could be a guy for the long run. Maybe not weeks 1, 2, or 3, but for seasons way beyond this one.
Yeah, and to your point, sorry to cut you off, Dylan. Just wanted to comment really quickly on what Dennis was saying, only because I know you tweeted on something similar a week or so ago. I said something similar on last week's show. The Jets are this may be, draft day might be one of the very few times that you're glad you're in such dire need of talent at so many spots, because it does leave you open at so many different positions where, of course, you can get it wrong by taking a guy who doesn't pan out. But if you're the Jets, they're at 23, especially, again, at premium spots, there are going to be tackles who can start day one. There should be corners who can start day one. Not the greatest edge class, but there are some guys there who can play. Interior O-line, depending on how you feel about a guy like Dickerson or Humphrey, like are they first-round guys? I would think probably more likely 34. But either way, if they like them enough, if it's interior line, if it's tackle, if it's edge, if it's corner, you can use a guy at every one of those spots. So as Dennis alluded to earlier, you truly can go best player available, because you've got 4 or 5 different positions where you could really get a guy. I'm not a big fan of a receiver in that spot because they've added 2 guys. But as you said earlier, Dennis, you can say, I don't want this, I don't want that. But there's always exceptions. I can sit here and say I don't want a receiver at 23. But if Jalen Waddle falls to 23, that changes things. Yep. That is an absolute day one game-changing player. I don't want the guys who were projected to be there, because I feel like there are bigger needs. But if someone falls, of course the situation changes. But I'm going to kick it back to you now, Dylan. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, just following up, I think the Jets are in a win-win situation with 23 and 34. Obviously, they could get the pick wrong as far as the player panning out, but there's not many positions that should make Jets fans upset with the amount of holes that we have there.
Yep.
But going back to the cornerback talk, could you see a reunion of Richard Sherman and Robert Saleh post-draft if the Jets fail to solidify the cornerback position in the draft? Say they'd miss out on the run on cornerbacks in the first round and Farley's not there, or they just say he's medically not a fit for them. Do you think that they could grab a veteran like Sherman in the beginning of May?
Yeah, I definitely think that's still a possibility, given the relationship Sherman has with Saleh. And, I think one of the things I heard early on was that Sherman probably would want to stay on the West Coast. He would want to stay near family and that kind of thing. But knowing that, if he goes into May and he still doesn't have a team, well, if he still wants to play, he'll have an opportunity somewhere, and he might want to go where he knows the scheme. He knows what is expected of him, and he'll come in and be a leader
wherever he goes, and especially a place like the Jets, if he comes to, New York, you wonder how much he does have left. Obviously, it wouldn't be a long-term thing. It would be kind of a short-term solution and maybe help guys like Bless Austin and Bryce Hall just kind of come up. And even in that secondary room, helping Marcus May just kind of like, meld that whole unit together. And so, yeah, I could see that. I still don't know if he's 100% on board with coming to the East Coast and, playing. And really, we've seen this in the past also where, guys have come here, Ty Law way back, who was a Pro Bowler for the Jets at the tail end of his career. And we've seen, other players come at the end of their careers, and it's just, I feel like they're trying to do something different now. They're trying to really establish a young core of players. So it's still probably like 50-50 on a Sherman coming out here. And if they go early at a cornerback, then the answer to that question was that they don't really want Sherman, here. Like, that's not a fit. So I guess we'll see. But I'd say it's 50-50 at this point.
Yeah, it's funny that excuse me, sorry, swallowed wrong. It's funny you mentioned the Sherman thing, because the draft strategy has always been build through the draft and then supplement in free agency, and you see the NFL kind of shifting to, all right, let's hold out on veterans until the draft, and if we still can't get the guy, we'll go after the veteran like that, like we saw with Joe Flacco and Frank Gore. Obviously those didn't pan out, but I think you start to see a similar trend with veterans waiting until the start of the summer to sign with teams. But just switching back to the quarterback talk, I just wanted to get your perception on how you thought Joe Douglas handled the Sam Darnold trade situation. Do you think that he could have waited any longer to trade him, maybe squeeze out a little bit more value, maybe draft weekend, or do you just think the compensation was fair for what they got already for him?
I think that's a good question, because I think when you look at the compensation and you see that they got a sixth rounder, a second, and a fourth next year, that's pretty good. That's pretty good, because based on the quarterback's body of work, Sam, look, he has all the potential in the world, and people love his character, obviously. He was a good fit in New York. He handled everything well here, all the adversity. He always said the right thing. I really appreciated him for that. 23-year-old kid, and, younger when he was going through the mono and all that. I mean, he really handled himself well, and it's too bad that things didn't work out for him, because I think he had the right mindset. Now he's going to Carolina, where he should do well. If he can overcome some of those issues that have held him back, personally, as far as the mechanics and what we've all talked about over the last 3 years, weaknesses of his. But when you look at it from the Jets' perspective, and if you could get 3 draft picks from the Carolina Panthers for a Sam Darnold, including a second rounder next year, I think it was time to cash in. I thought that it would go on until the draft. I thought that we wouldn't see Darnold moved until day 2 of the draft. I thought, okay, they're going to take their quarterback, and then day 2 we'll see some movement, and Darnold will be shipped somewhere, and they'll get some picks. But I don't know that they could have gotten more. And I think what this also does is it pushed the reset button now, instead of, okay, now we're going to push it, now we're going to move Sam, now we're going to do – we all know the direction this franchise is going in now, and they're going with a young quarterback who they're going to draft. So I think the timing was right. I think they had to do that. It kind of cleared all of the intrigue and mystery over what will they do, because I flip-flopped constantly on it, because I was thinking I never really thought that the two could coexist.
the number 2 pick and Darnold together in the same season. That would not be good for the room. Even though I think Sam would be fine, I think that's just, where are you going with that? So I kept flip-flopping, though, on whether they would keep Sam or trade him. Keep him, trade him. And I saw pros and cons to both. I think they thought that, too. They were going back and forth, too, until they decided, okay, what we need to do is move forward, and we're going to do this. Now, Joe Douglas didn't live up to the promise that he made to Sam Darnold's parents by surrounding him with talent. He didn't do that. Well, now he's got to do it with whoever it is that they draft. If it's Zach Wilson, which it looks like, well, he needs to surround him with talent, or Joe Douglas is going to be out of a job in a few years because this team's not going to be able to win with a kid trying to lead a team that doesn't have enough talent. We see it over and over again. And I know if you guys go back to the Mark Sanchez days, if they had just kept some of the core on that offense and built, I think you could have seen some consistency instead of like kind of the cliff that the team fell off by not having Sanchez in particular. Yeah, I mean, he wasn't the most talented guy, but he was able to do some things, and you saw with the running game, the whole ground and pound, like, you know, we saw those years. So it's on Joe Douglas to right the wrong that he had with Sam Darnold by surrounding whoever it is, and really, you know, with the talent, and really starting up front with that line, making sure that it's not just a patch a hole line like it has been the past few years, but when you go into this season with this offensive line, those 4 or 5 guys will be the guys moving forward with the quarterback who will be playing behind them. So I think, yes, the Jets got a good amount for Sam Darnold, and the timing was right to part ways when they did. And I'm not sure, like I said, if they would have gotten anything more than this at the draft. Maybe a desperate team gives them, you know, maybe a 5th rounder instead of, you know, a 6th or something. But I think Douglas did well with that move for all of those reasons I mentioned.
Dennis, just want to say thank you so much for joining us and being so generous with your time. It's really appreciated. Always love having you on. No music questions this time around. Only other than how ready are you for concerts to come back and see some live music?
Oh man, I can't wait. It's one of those things, you know, going to concerts, going to shows, and just the energy and the vibe. You know, it gets you going, and you just miss that sometimes. But I don't know if you saw, I tweeted recently that I listened to the new Tool album. It's not so new anymore. It's probably like a year and a half old now. But I finally sat down and listened to the whole almost 2-hour album from start to finish, and it's just like, wow. And you forget like how good some of this music is. You know, just seeing it live and seeing different bands and that. Yeah, man, I'm ready. I'm ready to roll. I hope you know, we're able to do that, and we were seeing it at ball games, you know, and arenas.
Yep.
So you would think that concerts are going to be coming up soon too, that, you know, they'll have, you know, a limited amount of space and amount of concert goers and stuff, but we'll be able to do that. We'll be able to start seeing bands again and live music. So, yeah, man, I can't wait.
Yeah, I know a time or two for me during lockdown, I may have had a couple of evenings where I had a couple drinks and went onto YouTube to find a concert that I was actually at to watch it, and
yes.
and kind of, I'm like, this is as close as it's going to get. I'm going to relive this through my TV and have a couple of beers, and you know, we had to cancel Guns N' Roses and Green Day during lockdown, and I know a bunch of people had to cancel a bunch of stuff. Guns
N' Roses
was
the last show that I saw. Guns N' Roses was the last show I saw before. It was at the Super Bowl. Down in Miami. They performed the day before. Yeah, and it was of all people, Snoop Dogg opened up for Guns N' Roses.
Oh wow, that's incredible. I didn't realize that. They had so many different opening acts for that tour. It was it was kind of ridiculous. But I'm not sure I've seen that with another band, and yeah, kind of bummed out. They were supposed to be returning to London this year, 2021, and then they announced the other day they pushed it back again to 2022. So,
oh wow!
But but I'm ready for it. But again, thanks so much for coming on, Dennis. Hopefully get you on again at some point during the season, and hopefully we're talking about some of these actual draft picks, playing some quality football.
No doubt about it. Well, I appreciate you guys having me, and you guys do a great job, and it's about time Jet fans are able to start celebrating again, because it's been a long time. So, and I think
certainly has.
They know it. the franchise knows it. They need to get the job done now. So, and I think you guys can have some trust in Joe Douglas. I think he knows what he needs to do. So we'll see over the next week, 10 days. We'll see. There could be a major upgrade, a major improvement to this roster over the the 10 picks or maybe more. That if they get some more. So we'll see what happens.
All right, Dennis, thanks again for joining us. That is Dennis Waszak of the Associated
Take care,
Press.
Dennis. Thank you.
You got it, guys. Take care.
Take care, Dennis. As I said, Dennis, friend of the show. We try to get him on whenever we get the opportunity, of course, without inundating him with requests, because he's got a lot to do, AP reporter. And as I said at the top, had the opportunity to meet with Dennis a few times at camp. Really good dude and fantastic taste in music. So moving along, Dylan, to as we said at the top, we're going to cover some of some day 3 undrafted free agent type players who we like. I know they don't grab the headlines, and they're not. I don't know what it is, Dylan. For me, I look back, and maybe again this is just me being kind of a sports nerd and never growing out of the part where I love the process. I love the development of the guys who, especially the guys who aren't supposed to make it. I can remember as a kid, I used to be a huge, crazy, insane baseball fan. And, man, getting the Sunday New York Daily News when they would have the Yankees minor league box scores or stat lines. And that back then, that was it. That was your only link to how the guys in the minors were doing. And I used to love it. I couldn't get enough of picking out the names, seeing who was playing well, and wanting to see these guys develop and come up through the system. And I'm the same way with football. I want to see guys, as I said, especially these these late round undrafted players who aren't supposed to make it, just basically beating the odds to become a good player for your favorite team. The Jets don't see it nearly enough, but I took some time this week. This week for me was a lot of looking at guys, who different boards. I went to TDN, and I started at the 300th ranked guy. And just started going down from there and probably looked at 40, 50 players. And, I literally, that was all I did for a few days. And some of it was ridiculous because some of these guys, they played so little. I'm having to watch, there were a couple players I find myself I just watched 40 minutes of this guy to find him making a couple of plays to see what he's capable of. Because some of them are backups.
Right, yep.
You got to, is he on the field? He's not even on the field right now. Let's skip to the next play. Okay, he's still not on the field. Skip to the next play. Okay, there he is. He didn't do anything. Especially, what's frustrating is when you're trying to watch an O-lineman and you have a lot of these zone blocking schemes, and oftentimes a defender won't even enter that guy's zone, and all you're seeing is you're just watching him come out of his stance, pop up, backpedal, and then the play's over. And you get 10 of those in a row, and it's could someone please engage this guy so I can see if he can play football? So it drives me a little bit crazy sometimes, but I'll just go through. Do you have a few names you want to do? You want to go? I'll do a name, you do a name, or do you want me to just do a chunk of names and then?
Yeah, I have a solid list of about 5 to 3 that I feel pretty comfortable about.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and get us started with one then?
All right, so the first one I have is a wide receiver. I think all 3 actually are offensive players for me. It's Jalen Camp from Georgia Tech. I looked similar to you. I was using rankings lists that went down into the 2s and 300s. I didn't go as far down as 300 plus, but I stayed in that 240 to 280 range of players. Jalen Camp came in at 297 on a top 300 list that I saw, so I went all the way to the bottom for him. He's 6'2", 187. He ran a 4.43. He had a 40-inch vertical and 30 reps on the bench. Georgia Tech wasn't really the ideal offensive system for him. Last year in 9 games, he had 27 catches for 417 yards and only 4 touchdowns, which was the bulk of his college production right there. He had under 800 total receiving yards over 4 years. So he's definitely a sleeper, somebody that you could probably grab in the 6th, 7th round, possibly UDFA, depending on what teams think about him, but very limited tape. And for the athletic ability that this guy possesses, I think he's definitely worth a late round swing.
All right. The first one I'm going to go over is a guy, and the reason he jumped out at me was because because of what the Jets have done at wide receiver. This guy's a receiver too. Because of what the Jets have done at wide receiver and adding guys, whether it's drafting Mims, signing Davis, they seem to be going for these guys who, not only guys with strong hands, but guys who are just physical players all around. Even when the ball's not in their hands, they're looking for somebody to beat up. These super, aggressive blocking receivers who can also catch the football. And a guy that I hadn't really heard of till I dug down into the 300 and ups. Let's see, Ben Skowronek out of Notre Dame. Big guy, 6'3", had some interesting game. Had a game against, I want to say, Boston College, where he had like 3 touchdowns. Had a huge game against Pitt where he made a great contested leaping catch. Kind of lost his balance for a second, regained it, and went the distance for a 75-yard touchdown. So, again, there'll be some issues. These guys, there's a reason why they're ranked in the 300s. Like, there are some questions, is he fast enough? Is he explosive enough? That's something we'll only know over time. He was a transfer from Northwestern, played pretty well there. I didn't watch any of his film there, but he had decent numbers. So I think Skowronek's a guy, and actually after watching him, because I'll look these guys up, I'll look up their numbers, then I'll take to Twitter to see if there's any guys, any analysts or draft guys who I respect who comment on them. And I believe it was Daniel Jeremiah who tweeted out earlier this offseason a clip of him just burying somebody as a blocker. That same thing that was kind of jumping out. I hadn't seen this particular play, but I'd seen a few where he threw some really impressive blocks. And he just said, looks like this kid Skowronek, kind of enjoys the blocking aspect of his game. And he really does. So he was the guy, again, big target at 6'3", made some plays as a receiver, and is a guy that if you've got him on the field, he's going to kind of match what some of the things the Jets have added this offseason in being a receiver who can is willing to bury some defenders. So he's my first guy. Who do you got next, Dylan?
Yeah, sticking with offensive playmakers, my second one is a running back out of Iowa State, and that's Kune Nwangu. He has very limited production, only 143 career rushes. I believe that was over 3 or 4 seasons in college. But he's 6 foot, 212 pounds, and I have 2 sets of numbers on him, and I'll read you the top set, which are quote-unquote worst numbers. But he ran a 4.31 40 and a 6.83 3 cone. So you put those together at the size that he is, and I don't think that the limited production should scare anybody away from taking a swing on this kid late in the rounds. I was only able to watch one game on YouTube of him, just some cut up of, I think, against Oregon. But you see a little bit of the hesitation behind the line, but when he bursts through that hole, he's going to make an 8, 10, 12-yard chunk play happen. So I really like what I saw out of Nwangu. I've seen him on a couple boards. I didn't see him on this particular top 300, so I had to go to Dane Brugler's athletic guide to find him. He's number 16 on his running back ranking, so he's pretty far down there, and I believe it was a 6th and 7th round grade on him. Yep. So again, just another playmaker with the athletic ability that shouldn't be passed up and let go to UDFA.
All right. The next guy I'm going to highlight here is a guy, again, I'd not seen at all until this past week, and I sent you and Alex a couple clips of him because he just his overall skill set was really impressive as a potential sort of fullback / backup running back. Garrett Grosheck out of Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't seen him before. Guy 6'2", 6'3", 220. Ran, I think, a 4.6, but he, to me, looks a lot faster than that. Good first step. And what really jumped out at me was a guy for his size and his feet. Like, the way he was, he would hit the hole. There'd be defenders on the ground, and he'd, easily just, quick feet, hop over them, keep going without breaking stride, and caught the ball really well, which surprised me. It was only one play, but of course, I didn't watch. I don't watch 10 games on these guys. I watch, depending on the player. If you see a ton of one guy in 2 games, I might watch 2, but I try to do 3 or 4 games. So I think I watched 3 of his games. Saw him line up wide at wide receiver at one point and ran a slant and was targeted. I think a better throw would have been a catch. So I'm looking at this guy. I'm thinking he's as big as a fullback. He plays halfback. They line him up at receiver. And when they hit him on swings and screens, like, he shows soft hands. Like, he doesn't look awkward catching the ball like I would expect a guy his size to. So and he looks like he'd be a good special teams player. So again, another guy I'd never heard of, and I'm just watching him and thinking I would love to see this guy in camp. Like I said, faster than he looks, better hands than I expected, better feet than I would expect for a guy who weighs 220, and another one who, again, limited reps. He was Jonathan Taylor's backup in college for most of his time there. But he had a few games where when he got the carries, when he got the attempts, like, he produced. The numbers were there. Because of his size, maybe he projects as a fullback. But Garrett Grosheck is a guy that I'll be keeping an eye on because just, again, fun player to watch.
Yeah, I remember watching some of those clips you sent in the group chat we have, and I came away impressed. I remember commenting. I was really impressed about the one. I think he just hit the hole and didn't look back, and he took it about 50, 60 yards to the house. Nobody was catching him.
Yeah.
But, yeah, the third person on my list is another running back as well. And this is somebody that I wanted to ask Emory Hunt about. I saw him comment about him on Twitter a few days before he came on the show, and I meant to include him in my list. And that's Elijah Mitchell from Louisiana. He's number 229 on this board of 300 that I found. He's 5'10", 201. He ran a 4.38 40, and he had a 10'9" broad jump, 37.5-inch vert, which